Here we are. Welcome to a conversation on the Solana ecosystem, but really focused more on multi-chain infrastructure development and the advantages of going cross-chain and some of the tooling that's been made possible in recent weeks and months to really expand that out. I want to just kick it off. Quick intros from all of you. Tell us a little about yourself and your projects.
Sure. I'm the CEO of OpenDive Technologies. We do a lot of gaming and infrastructure on Solana. And also co-founder of Pokerhouse, which is the largest community on Polkadot Kusama ecosystem. In a former life, I led blockchain strategy at Goldman Sachs, and then launched a Bitcoin startup back in 2012, which exited in 2014.
Yeah, I'm Joe McCann. I'm the founder, CEO, and CIO of Asymmetric. We are a liquid crypto venture fund backed by folks like Mark Andreessen, Chris Dixon, Tiger Global, FTX, Circle, Multichain, et cetera. We invest in early stage projects and protocols, but we also run a number of liquid strategies as well as crypto native strategies, which range from anywhere like arbitrage to liquidation bots and relayers for protocols, et cetera.
Hi, my name is Troy, CEO of Swim Protocol. We're a dApp built on top of Wormhole, looking to bring the primitives that Wormhole's built to retail-facing apps. Previously, I was a quant at SIG and a quant at Alameda.
I'm Hendrik. I'm a director for the Wormhole Foundation. Wormhole is a cross-chain interoperability protocol which enables developers and asset issuers to create truly cross-chain applications and assets. The goal of that is to solve capital inefficiencies in a truly cross-chain world where protocols deploy across multiple chains and to solve the user experience issues that come with that.
Great. So before we get into some of the conversation around multi-chain and cross-chain infrastructure, Joe, I'm really curious. We're here today at SALT, which is put on with FTX as well. This is, about a year ago, you really started to see more traditional financial institutions, private wealth management, family offices getting interested in exposure into crypto. But they didn't really know how to go about that a year ago. Even in September at SALT then, a lot of the conversation was not as much, this is what our fund is doing in crypto, but this is what our fund would like to be able to do. How do we figure out how to do it? What have you really seen change in the last few months around that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is there's the kind of maturity in recognizing crypto is more than just crypto. It's the rebranding of Web3 has actually made, to Web3 has actually made crypto, I think, more palatable for a number of traditional institutions. In addition to that, though, let's be clear, if you're a pension fund, for example, you have a requirement to, pay your pension holders, right? And they need to actually, you can no longer just get 8% annualized very easily. So they're getting further out on the risk curve. And more importantly, they're now having internal mandates where they have to invest in crypto. So when I was at Passport Capital in 2018, to run a quant desk for crypto, effectively no institutions were comfortable or considering crypto. And now the complete opposite has changed in a very short amount of time because they actually have mandates to do it. And I think as more and more funds like myself and other funds in the ecosystem can provide kind of that layer of institutional comfort, they will feel more comfortable going forward with the maturity from not only the products and the security, but also this kind of broader scope of investment opportunity in Web3.
Yeah, I think we see some of the interest in ETFs as at least we can get some level of exposure. But I feel like we all probably have the opinion that ETFs are all of the risk and not much of the upside.
That's right.
And you're really talking about the ability to participate in DeFi markets. So Hendrik, with Wormhole, a lot of its function is to help users and institutions move assets, digital assets of all sorts, cross-chain, as well as having contracts communicate between different protocols. Talk a little bit about how that's being used and what the impetus was to build that.
Yeah, I think at its core, the start is to really build truly cross-chain assets, because in a world where there's protocols with interesting yield opportunities spread across different chains, it's important that the capital can move freely between those, and that that can happen with low slippage and low fees, or no slippage and no fees. And that can really only happen if the assets that we're transferring are natively cross-chain. And this is something that Wormhole at its core enables. So an asset doesn't really live on one chain only, but it truly lives on multiple chains and is fungible between these. So this is what we call X assets. These are truly cross-chain assets, and Wormhole is delivering a solution to essentially allow asset issuers or people minting coins to turn their asset into a cross-chain asset with like just one click required. But I think what we're seeing a lot of like applications doing is like building what we call X steps. These are truly cross-chain applications. And what's interesting about this, and we also see that with like institutional money flowing into the space, like usually you have like custody or your hub or your assets like sitting on one chain. And then it's important for you to be able, like you've built your infrastructure to interact with that chain. You might have a MetaMask wallet, but you don't have the 4 other wallets for the new chains that have launched that are giving you interesting opportunities. And for the protocols, they want to build their applications in a way that can like tap into liquidity and tap into the user bases of other chains. So what Wormhole enables there at the core is applications to build for truly cross-chain. And truly cross-chain building, like, oftentimes can mean, like, I build my protocol and then I deploy it to 4 different chains. That means I essentially have 4 protocols now. I have different liquidity in silos. It's kind of like I'm starting banks in 4 cities, but they can't exchange capital. So they're like, each of them is just as good as itself, but not as the greater. And with X-Steps, an application can deploy on one chain. The code is written once. The capital sits in there concentrated and efficiently. And then what Wormhole enables users to do is and developers to do is build essentially light interfaces to these applications where people can interact with this application from other chains without having to bridge tokens, without having to switch wallets. X-Anchor is a very prominent example of that, where Anchor is a lending protocol hosted on Terra, but using X-Anchor, you can interact with Anchor from Avalanche and more chains to come using Wormhole in the back end without having to switch wallets or perform any additional steps. So it's like truly Wormhole enables to turn blockchain users into Web3 users that focus on interacting with an application no matter where they are. And I think this is really at the core of where we think the cross-chain world is going.
Yeah, we had a great L1 panel on this stage a few days ago, and it was really a lot of the conversation there focused on, EVM versus another runtime environment. Isn't it such a problem that you have different standards? And I think the analogy given there was what if Chrome could only use certain kinds of technology? Well, we actually went through all of this with browsers as well, where you'd have Internet Explorer have a very different rendering experience, then you'd have Chrome have a different rendering experience, and it was not solved by taking those base layer technologies and making them the same thing. It was solved at the application level and at the user level. So I love that approach of saying we can actually solve these problems for users without forcing a technological change in the underlying L1 or L2. I do want to touch a little bit on the idea of cross assets, X assets that you're talking about. Bridges have been under, I think, a lot of scrutiny for very reasonable reasons over the last few months and years. How should someone think about an X asset as different from simply a wrapped asset? Yeah.
So I think one thing, prefacing this with one thing, is I don't see the blockchain space developing into one where there aren't going to be cross-chain assets or where there aren't going to be wrapped assets, in the sense that if I'm on Polygon, there's no way for me to have ETH without it being a wrapped asset. There's always going to be some trust assumption into a bridge or some protocol that helps me bring that coin from another chain where it originally lived there. So, but there's a couple ways in which these assets can be done. So with a wrapped asset, what we have is the asset gets locked up on one chain, and then we have this essentially IOU on the other chain. And with Wormhole X assets, the interesting thing is that this is fully cross-chain fungible. This means I have a coin on Ethereum, I move it to Solana, I can move it to Polygon, and I can move it back to ETH. It always stays the same representation. It's a truly cross-chain asset, and it can go to any chain that is connected to the Wormhole portal, which is the token bridge part, any connected network of that. But there's even deeper ways to integrate and turn it into a truly cross-chain asset, which is introducing burning and minting functionalities. So instead of the asset being locked up on one end, it gets destroyed and a new representation gets minted. So the global supply stays the same, and we lose this like implicit locking of assets on one chain. And the important thing here is that if we think there's going to be a world where assets, like where protocols are deployed in a cross-chain world across different protocols, the assets need to go there. I need to be able to use Ethereum on Polygon. And then the important thing is that like people minting tokens like choose a cross-chain representation, that they like go to a Wormhole portal, create an X asset, and like make sure that there is a canonical representation in the ecosystem that is fungible and compatible. Because otherwise, where we end up with is 5 different wrappers or cross-chain representations. It's important that consistency is created. And I think therefore, Bridge, like in a highly competitive space, that like frameworks like the X-Asset framework are offered up, where it's as easy as possible to create them, and where they can go to as many chains as possible, as like little friction as possible.
Yeah, I think one of the things to consider, though, when Troy's discussing is that over the years, right, since institutions really came onto blockchain or crypto, what has happened is that we've added more complexity. If you guys worked at a big institution or a family office, all the things that were mentioned add operational risk, regulatory risk. It's in reality really the play here for the coming probably year or so is to identify services or launch services that offset those risks. And this is what big institutions have done over the years. When you look at, for example, Goldman Sachs, they invested in Circle. They invested it on the infrastructure plays that kind of offsets that risk and allows them to kind of go ahead and hedge also on the technology itself. And I think also what's important is that, like, till this day, probably as it relates to blockchain itself, it's been about capital markets speed and transparency. And when you look at whether we have that being used in internally institution, it hasn't really happened, right? So there's a bit of a shift from initially going looking into cryptocurrencies as an asset, then using them as for infrastructure, and now seeing where we can actually get more value in terms of investment.
Yeah. So Troy, we've been talking a lot about sort of the tooling and the theoretical applications for some of the stuff, but Swim is doing cross-chain liquidity today and helping facilitate that. Talk a little bit about what you guys have built there and how people are actually using that.
Yeah, super excited. So what we've launched so far is a native asset swap to basically, like Hendrik said, standardize the canonical version so that people can just use the asset that has the deepest liquidity. And coming out next is cross-chain smart contract calls, which is heavily involved with Wormhole's new Payload 3, as well as their relayer. Basically, being able to encode cross-chain calls on, say, Ethereum, and have that trigger a bunch of cross-chain interactions on a whole host of various other chains. And so, in essence, these are kind of just the steps we're taking now. And the ultimate goal is kind of when a user kind of interacts with dApps, there's so much boilerplate asset management that has to happen under the hood. They have to think about where their assets are, what chains they're on, which bridge they want to use, what form of the asset they need a bridge from, and where they need a bridge to, and how to convert that on either end. All of these things aren't super creative. What a user really wants to do is, say, do super fast trading on Drift because transactions are fast and they're cheap. And maybe to do that, they want to free up capital by selling some NFTs on ETH. But right now, they have to think about all the steps in between. And so at Swim, we're taking the whole host of primitives built from Wormhole and trying to make this as seamless as possible, where the user can just go to each app and do the things that they want to do without thinking about all the layers under.
Yeah. So Joe, you and Asymmetric are both building in the space, investing in the space. You've been involved in the Solana ecosystem for a while. What is the future that you are seeing that makes you, as an investor, excited about how things built on top of Wormhole or Swim or any of the other cross-chain technologies are actually going to deliver more value than the traditional financial ecosystem or help supplement that? What is the reason there? Like, we're talking a lot about like tooling and exciting pieces, but at the end of the day, there's a reason that people are investing in this space.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think for the past few years, there's been a lot of focus on building the primitives and the infrastructure and tooling, and it's a very technical topic.
Yes.
Most people are not highly technical. And so I think the next layer up is how do we create these immersive experiences and applications where the underlying technology is more or less abstracted away. And this is some of the stuff that the guys at Wormhole and Swim are doing today. They're creating this type of underlying technology that's going to enable app developers to abstract away the technical complexity. And when you do that, you open the door to a massive audience of potential new Web3 users, right? And so the things that we're interested in investing in and paying attention to are yes, we're interested in protocol and infrastructure, of course, because we're a very technical shop. But more importantly, what are the things that are going to be unlocking more users coming into Web3 and crypto? And so this spans the gamut from the NFT ecosystem, which is using culture as a means for people to come into crypto, right? So I use this analogy a lot where back in the early days of Twitter, it was primarily like Silicon Valley folks, some techies, et cetera. And then one day something changed, and that was when Oprah Winfrey live tweeted on her television show, and it kind of crystallized Twitter as this culturally acceptable form of communication and technology. Well, in that it was culture bringing adopting Twitter as this new thing. With NFTs, we're seeing that culture is now adopting crypto through art and the creativity of NFTs. So that is an example of how users are engaging with something that has historically with crypto been very technical, very kind of early adopter financial engineers, if you will. So that layer of how culture is now coming into crypto is something we're investing in. And this spans from NFTs to the metaverse to video games and a whole host of other things. But again, none of this is actually really possible without the infrastructure that's been laid over the past few years and the work that folks like Swim and Wormhole are doing today.
Yeah, the expansion of the NFT ecosystem is really, I find that particularly fascinating for a few reasons. One is that, being, I would say, second or third to the idea of developing an NFT spec gives you a lot of advantages. So the NFT spec developed on Solana is quite different than like the Ethereum NFT spec of 721. It allows for things like creator royalties to be hard-coded into it. And really, the NFT spec is built to be something that's creator first, which was not necessarily where people thought NFTs were going to go when they were originally being brought up as a concept. They thought it was going to be more used to represent financial products, mortgages on chain, things that require some form of unique digital identity. It turns out that the first real hit use case was JPEGs. Right?
That's right.
which is, I think, a bit of a surprise to everyone looking back. But if you look at something like Metaplex, which implemented the NFT standard on Solana, there's about almost 11 million NFTs that have been minted since August of last year. There's about 1.8 million wallets that actively hold NFTs on Solana right now. So Irvin, what you are building, both with OpenDive and with some of the wallet solutions you're looking at, is really trying to bring that user experience to a different level with NFTs. Talk about a little bit how you're thinking about both expanding that ecosystem and bringing the utility of NFTs a little bit beyond just the browser wallet.
Sure. I think if anybody on stage has used a swap, or I hate to say it, has used Wormhole, the user experience is horrible. It's really tough to actually bridge assets across multiple chains, right? When you're looking, for example, from going from a layer 1 on Ethereum to L2, what do you have to do? You have to go ahead and sign a transaction, go to the other wallet, and open it up, right? And of course, there's different solutions that are custodial that do this. But currently, as it is, it's horrible. And when you look at even institutions trying to use these technologies or services, it's tough for them, right? And so, what Joe was saying is perfectly right. I think, in the near future, where the money is at is really services that are going to be improving the user experience or abstracting this level of complexity. But up to this date, I would probably say that we're still kind of on the infrastructure level and building like the UDP, TCP kind of stack. In our case, for example, when we look at, you mentioned NFTs, and I'm an advisor for Matterplex Foundation, and we think about what is it like, for example, for your kids, for your family to use a wallet, right? Like starting from the notion of a wallet, it's like, what is that? I'm pretty sure if you tell your grandmother, it's like, what? I have to go buy a new, leather wallet? It's completely horrible. And then you go ahead and open up a mobile wallet or like MetaMask or any other kind of browser extension, and then there's this notion of a swap. Like, how often do you guys swap on your wallets, right? Traditional people or retail people don't do this, right? And so in our case, we're thinking about, well, how do we bring the Web 2 folks into the Web 3 environment? And so then we have to think about not only about the user experience, but then also about the infrastructure. Like, think about, do you imagine actually always paying per transaction for all the things you do? That'd be ridiculous, right? And so, like, it's not only about thinking about the user experience and the infrastructure, but also I would say around the business model. And I'd say that the current business models for a lot of dApps, it's kind of broken. When you think about, for example, using a DeFi application, you not only have to pay for gas, but you also have to pay a continuous service fee to the user. What if in the near future, for using a DeFi protocol or app, you just pay a monthly fee, a flat fee? Isn't that better than saying you might have to pay, quote unquote, $30 notional, and the next month you might end up paying $100 notional? And so in our case, we're thinking about that, right? How do we perhaps allow people to pay a flat fee and then leverage, for example, that underlying fee and put in a DeFi protocol to earn interest? And so by earning interest, we could offset our costs for gas or even the transactional fees or services. And so this is what we do for gaming, and this is what we're also building into our wallet. But as it stands for Solana and Metaplex, what Austin mentions is that I would say honestly that Solana really took notes or learned a lot from the previous L1s, not only just Ethereum, we're talking about the really obscure ones, that are out there, and kind of thought about, well, how can we do this better? And so in the context of Metaplex, it is thinking about the creator first, right? It's thinking about things like royalties. It is thinking about creating artwork and including multiple artists, but also thinking about the other non-artistic use cases. So how do we store things like land deeds, for example, right? And a land deed perhaps might belong or might not only be owned by you, but maybe you and your partner, husband or wife, or your kids. And so you can code directly on-chain on the NFT. But that's the way that we're thinking, and we're particularly not only thinking about the UX, UI of these applications, but also around the business model. How do we make it more attractive to traditional folks in the Web 2 environment?
Yeah, it's funny, when you're talking about that Web 2 to Web 3 bridge, I think we can all look back at, since about mid-2016, consumer-facing applications have been about 6 months away. And it feels like, we are starting to see more and more consumer-facing applications come in. Even things like NFTs are obviously a great portal to bring people into the Web3 world. You have Step-In and other sort of gaming infrastructure plays or Move to Earn. Joe, when you're looking at your fund and your team is allocating capital, how much of that roughly is going towards the infrastructure layer plays like Wormhole versus things that are actually user-focused? Is the world really ready for that transition?
Yeah, so we kind of have a view that right now there's probably like 5 major categories where we want to invest. And the first is what we call kind of DeFi 2.0. So we have a view that effectively every traditional financial instrument or contract will likely come on chain, and a lot of that institutional flow will also move on chain, and we want to be part of supporting that move over. The second is kind of the NFT broader ecosystem. So not literally NFTs. Yes, I own personally NFTs, but we want to support the kind of picks and shovels around the NFT ecosystem. So this could be anywhere from investing in a marketplace to investing in a collateralized lending protocol where you post your NFT as collateral. The third is Web3 infrastructure, and they're rarely, I'll say, they more look like Web 2 cloud companies, right? So you could think of like a cloud provider like AWS or Microsoft Azure, but there are companies out there that are enabling all of these apps to be built, and those investments do really well in a bullish or a bear market because everybody needs to always be running on infrastructure. The fourth category is what we see as like metaverse and Web3 video games. We think Web3 video games will probably dwarf every other category of video games in history. So we want to be to keep a pulse on that and investing heavily in that space. And then the last one in the payment space / e-commerce, when we saw what happened with Solana Pay, for example, we saw this as kind of the big leap forward for payments with crypto. There was always this discussion about if Bitcoin was going to be, a payment solution, and I never really thought that was going to be the case for various reasons. But when Solana Pay came out, it wasn't only the fact that you could pay with USDC, but it actually gave power back to the merchant. And I think that is something that people kind of, especially as consumers, we lose on the credit card side. We just use our credit cards, but that fee is being charged to the merchant. So if the merchant can regain 3.5% of their revenue just by using something like Solana Pay and have instant settlement, I mean, that's a pretty compelling area to want to go and invest in. The reason I mentioned these 5 categories is that the best investments that we look for are where they tend to converge. So for example, it sounds like a lot, right? There's 5 different categories we should be going investing in. But think about it, a Web3 video game where you use your NFT to swap tokens because you're farming in some virtual metaverse environment, right? It sounds a little bizarre, but these are the types of things that we see as, and by the way, it's all running on Web3 infrastructure providers, right? So when you pull all of this together, you go, yeah, you kind of need to be looking at all 5 of these, but where's the convergence? And that's likely where the most alpha is. So that's where we tend to focus.
Yeah, and then looking at something like Swim, there's this whole idea of composability, which is a huge piece of DeFi and is starting to move into other pieces. The idea that you don't need to rebuild Chase on chain. You don't need to have every stack of a traditional banking infrastructure all vertically integrated within one house. You can have different kinds of applications that specialize in different kinds of activities that can interoperate on chain. How is Swim thinking about both the extendability and the use cases there for other applications on Solana or other blockchains to tie into what you're doing?
Yeah, certainly. So multi-chain kind of interactions just under the hood involve so many different steps, which currently make it hard to interoperate. There's stuff that happens on chain A, all the stuff that happens in the middle, and the stuff that happens on chain B. And so at Swim, we're trying to wrap that all into like one kind of plug-and-play SDK. And so you can think of some maybe complex interactions that someone wants to do. They want to unstake all of the USDC that they have on chain A, and they want to go allocate that and go earn some yield based on some distribution, based on what the current yields are. And they can kind of encode all of that, plug that in, and have that all perform on the other chain, all done in the source chain. And so that's just kind of an example of ways where if you make this complex thing kind of super simple, it basically turns like these dirt roads that are connecting all of these L1s to super connected highways, and basically being able to plug anything into anything. So it's like all the dApps, all of the yields on Ethereum, Terra, Solana, Avalanche, all connected and mobile at the same time.
Yeah, and if any of this sounds like it's overly complicated or not necessarily needed in the real world, just ask your kids about crossplay on video game consoles, and you'll see the importance of interoperability and composability in the real world for users. So, Hendrik, one of the things just before we're kind of wrapping up here, Wormhole is inherently an anti-maximalism play. You're talking about the ability to use Bitcoin and Ethereum as collateral in different applications, the ability to move an NFT from Solana onto Ethereum. Talk about a little bit about like what that actual strategy is there, and if you think maximalism is going to continue to exist.
Yeah. I think the fundamental assumption of this is that there's going to be a heterogeneous environment of different blockchains. That there's going to be an environment where some chains are going to be able to cater a certain type of user, let that be a GameFi user or someone focused more on DeFi applications, better. And that some chains are going to have properties that are better for certain types of applications. And if we assume that this is going to be the world, then we should enable developers to build on the chain that is best for their applications, and the users to host their wallets on the chains that are best for them. That can be geographical. Like I think we've seen chains that have specialized in certain geographies and community building, but that can just be in raw technological properties. And in that world, if we want UX to be great, if we want people to just, I want to yield farm. I don't want to like use this protocol, this protocol, this protocol. I want to use an application. I want to play a game. I don't want to have to think about like 3 dimensions of layers below and above that I need to figure out as a user. This all needs to be abstracted away so developers can pick what's best for them, and users can pick what's best for them. And that's really the goal of something like Wormhole. We've been laying like wires in the ground that can be used to communicate, but now it's about like solving that higher layer, about solving these user experience problems. And we're working on a couple like really exciting solutions that hopefully can enable this world to exist, because in a world where these are all silos, then I think innovation is really, really slowed down because people can't tap into the full potential of that they could.
Yeah. So if people are interested in learning more about you or your project, where can they find it?
They can go to wormholenetwork.com, learn about the protocol, join the Discord, probably the most crypto thing to do, become a part of the community, or check out Wormhole on Twitter.
Troy?
Follow the updates.
Swim.io. There are the links there for our Twitter and our Discord. Feel free to hop in.
You can find Asymmetric at asymmetric.